Fáilte Ash to Undercover Irish, Carja, you're very, very welcome. And I realise it's been 3 episodes in 1 week. Sometimes you wait for a bus and 2 come along. Well, with this episode, this is episode number 3. So while we're shifting a little bit from the last 2 episodes in terms of names of places or names of sporting clubs, to be more accurate, this particular one rests again on sport, but it's about culture. It's about culture in terms of hurling, and it's about culture in terms of our language, and a little bit of history thrown in as well. And one of the reasons why I want to sit down and get this episode out today, if possible, is because the trigger, the inspiration is Sunday, Day Donach coming, when Cork play Tipperary. Cork and Tipperary, last year's All-Ireland finalists in hurling, meet once again. And it's one of those sporting rivalries that seems constant and permanent. Like it's always been there. Another match, another build-up. Same counties and the same tension. And it's something that plays out in all sports. And especially in the GAA at inter-county level and club level. But here's the thing. This rivalry isn't just remembered in matches, in newspaper reports. And it's not even just recorded or remembered after the foundation of the GAA 1884. Because hurling is much older than that, and so too matches between Cork and Tipperary. It's remembered in a poem, because back in 1741, after one of the earliest recorded clashes, possibly the earliest recorded clash, someone wrote about it, but not in English, Oscuelga, in the Irish language, and that tells us something straight away. Because at that time, Ireland isn't just a situation where Irish is spoken by people. It's the language you use when something matters, when something's worth recording, worth remembering. So what you have isn't just a description of a game, it's a match report, just not the type we're used to. And maybe more importantly, it survives. Because this is a time when Irish culture, Irish customs, even games like hurling, are all under pressure. There are laws that are trying to push it out of the world and out of Ireland. Things like the statutes of Kilkenny trying to suppress Irish ways of life. And still they're playing. Still someone is writing it down, Oscuelga. So when Cork and Tip go at it this Sunday, Day Donach, you're not just watching a match. You're watching something that's alive for hundreds and hundreds of years. And on this occasion, it was captured in a poem. And today, Carja, in this episode of Undercover Irish, we're going to use that poem to reflect on then and compare with now. A Carja, a rivalry lekela. So, Carja, what I want to do is look at this poem, right? It's called Kirkig v Tiberdoran, 1741. And I want to use this poem as a kind of a textbook for this particular episode to understand the game as it was then and before, and the game as it is now. Let's find the contrasts and the continuity between those two times. And the way that they describe it in the poem is interesting, because the poem doesn't start with the game itself, it starts before that, with the challenge. There's a line in this particular poem that goes, Fogert Gaul Galaur in Nimmert Boira, which roughly means a wager declared, like a bet declared openly in this game of hurling. It's a different way of thinking about a match. This isn't just something that happens, it's something that's issued. It's a challenge, it's accepted, and that challenge is answered. You can feel it. And in 1741, they don't just do it, they say it outright. This is a contest. This is something to be answered. And everything that follows in that poem only makes sense because of that. And once the game begins, Carja, the language of the poem shifts. Because the poet doesn't really describe a match in the way we would. He describes it something that's closer to battle. You get words like leachra, heroes, slua, a host or an army, cogig, warfare. And suddenly you're not picturing a game anymore, you're picturing two sides meeting head on. And maybe it sounds a little bit dramatic. But listen to how we still talk about these matches now. We would still use the word battle, a war, a fight even. We talk about the physicality, the clashes, about who stands up to it. So the language hasn't really changed all that much when you think about it. It's just softened slightly. Because for the poet, in this case, there's no separation. This is conflict. And if you follow that line forward, you start to see how close sport is to real conflict and how they can sit beside each other in history. Because less than 2 centuries later, in 1920, for example, you have Bloody Sunday, Downloch na Fulla, and that involves one of the teams which will be playing on Sunday, the Downloch Shakuin, Tubradoran. A match, a crowd gathered, and then British forces opened fire on that crowd, that supporters of the Gaelic Athletic Association. And one of the players, Michael Hogan, is murdered along with many others. So when the poet in 1741 talks about hosts and warfare, it's a metaphor, but it's a metaphor that doesn't feel that far away. And maybe that's why it still resonates when we look at it. Because even now when Cork and Tipperary meet, there's still an edge to it. There's a sense that this isn't just a game, it's about something a little bit more. And that idea that this is something more than a game, you really see it in how the poet talks about the teams way back in the 1700s. He doesn't say Cork or Kirkig, he says Nabarrig. Nabarrig is the Barrys, so this is a family name. So representing Cork on the field of play on this particular day is a family name, a group, a lineage, even a power base. And that kind of rhymes with later years where nowadays we associate Cork and other inter-county teams as an amalgamation, a pick of the best players. But over times that has changed or been different. In the early years of Cumann Lúthchleasaigh Gael, it would have been common for the county to be represented perhaps by the county champions or a selection team from a club. And back then, it was represented by a family team, Nabarrig. So the match itself, it's between people who represent something. Their name, their place, their standing. And that's interesting because even though the names have changed, the idea hasn't. Now, of course, it's Kirkig, Cork. It's Tubradoran, Tipperary. And it's colours, jerseys and crests. Still about identity. Still about something bigger than the individuals, the leachra on the field. And sometimes that identity shows itself in unprecedented ways, like in 1919. So Cork, Kirkig are due to play Tubradoran in the Munster final, but of course this is the time of the revolutionary period. And of course Cumann Lúthchleasaigh Gael, as a sporting cultural body that's devoted to the cultural renewal of Ireland, is itself a target. And the Cork jerseys become a target too. It was common for Cork, Kirkig at the time to play in saffron and blue. And around about 2016, that replica jersey was reissued and Cork wore it on a number of occasions. You'll remember that with the C on the front of the jersey. But on this occasion, those jerseys were taken by British forces in a raid on Cook Street in Caherchirkey. We mentioned Cook Street. And the attempt to rename it in a podcast not so long ago. So they lined out in red instead the jerseys of the Total Abstinence Club, which had recently been made defunct. And it's because of this act and this game that the colour, red and white, the blood and bandage, we know associated with Cork, becomes a permanent fixture. So now when we see Cork in red, we're not just seeing a team, we're seeing a moment where sport, identity and history all collided. And that's not so far removed from this poem and what the poet is doing way back in 1741. Because when he says Nabarrig, he's doing the same thing. He is tying the game to an identity. to something that lasts beyond the match itself. And that's why these games matter, not just because of who wins, but because of what they represent. And when we start thinking about identity like that, we realise something else. Because these matches aren't private. They're not held behind closed doors like maybe the COVID year. They're meant to be seen. There's a line in this poem, evection or evexin nadina. So that comes from like the verb to see. And dina, the people. So in the sight of people. And it's a small phrase, a small part of this poem. But it tells you a lot. This isn't just about playing the game, it's about performing it. Being watched, being judged, being supported, being witnessed. And again, that part hasn't changed at all. The settings have, of course. Instead of a field near Rathcormac, Clown na Gaul, the Glen of the Foreigner, to be exact. Nowadays, we're accustomed to seeing these games play out in places like Páirc Uí Chaoimh, park named after Pádraig Ó Chaoimh, or Semple Stadium, Semple the Temple, Tom Semple's field. Concrete stands instead of open ground. Thousands instead of hundreds. But the feeling is the same. The moment that the teams come out, the noise building, everyone watching, and knowing that this one matters because without a crowd, without people to see it, to talk about it, to remember it, to pass it on, the matches don't carry the same weight. And back in 1741, the poet here understands that. He doesn't just tell us what happens, he reminds us that people were there to see it happen. And that's what turns it from a game into something shared, a shared experience, something remembered, and something that lasts. Now, just so far we've mentioned a couple of things grounded in this particular poem, and maybe looked at what it meant for that particular game way back in the 1700s, and then tried to draw it back to modern, or draw it forward to modern references, looking at Cork and Tipperary, Corcaigh agus Tiberdorn. For this particular part of it, I'm going to start in the modern era, because this particular part is about the psychology of a game, the psychology leading up to a game, and the psychology of the players during the game. If we think about what's facing Corcaigh and Tiberdorn on Sunday, and we see it in sport regularly in the modern era, psychology is very much a part of it. So for Cork on Sunday, Corcaigh, after the league campaign, coming into championship on Crave, they have to exercise the demons of last year's All-Ireland final. And for Tipperary, they're coming in as the All-Ireland champions, and there's a psychological challenge with that as well. And somewhere in the middle of this poem, something changes, because the poet doesn't just tell us who wins, he focuses on a moment, a shift. And there's a line, Hug or Tug Solace for Crediv Divsha. Literally kind of means we took the light from your belief. And it's such a striking way of putting it. To read the full line to you, here's what it says. Ishina Gafalus Tug Solace vor Crediv Divsha. So it's such a really powerful line, and it gives this image of getting the light literally from belief. Because it's not just about a scoreline, it's not just about getting a goal or a point or anything you can easily measure. It's about that feeling when a game turns, in this case during the game, and that happens regularly. Sometimes it's before the game too, the psychological battle. When one side starts to believe a little bit more and the other side feels something slip, and you can see it even now in Cork and Tip matches. Games that are level, tight, on edge, and then suddenly they're not because a score goes in or over and one follows the next. And you can almost sense it, one team rising and the other team dropping. And sometimes that shift doesn't start with the game itself, something that starts before the ball is thrown in. Like in 1990, Tipperary manager Babs Keating says it outright. Although he was misquoted, the one that stuck was, donkeys don't win derbies. And of course Cork took that personally, writing them off before the match even begins. And in doing that, he was trying to shape the same thing the poet is talking about, belief. psychological warfare, trying to take it away from one side and reinforce it with the other. But of course, in the modern era, you often hear the phrase, it's going to be pinned to the wall of the dressing room, used as a kind of a psychological tool. And that's exactly what Cork did, despite the fact that it was a misquoted quotation. Cork used it to their advantage in 1990. And that's an example of a modern version of what's described in this poem. Sinna go falús tug solas for credit díobse. So that particular donkeys don't win derbies misquotation is an example of a light-giving belief to a team in the modern era. And back in 1741, the poet uses this as the description of how Cork win the game, the Cork selection or the Corkig team. He describes Cork's win not just as something lucky or as something narrow, but something controlled. Le chumas gan chléin bith, with ability without flaw. That's a really powerful quotation. Le chumas gan chléin bith, with ability without flaw. It's interesting too, because even now when we talk about games like this, we fall back on the same idea. The better team won. They had more. They found another level, another gear. And that's exactly how the poet frames it here. Not just that Cork win, but that they deserved it. Over the course of the game, they proved themselves stronger. And that's just as striking as what comes next. Because he stops and he turns back to Tipperary, and he says, Ní vasam gur masla ná nóra fós. Ní vasam gur masla ná nóra fós. I do not consider it insult or shame. And that's a really important line, because for all the talk of a battle, the hosts and the dominance, there's still a sense of balance, a recognition that losing the game like this doesn't take anything away from you. And that feels very familiar too, because Cork, agus Tipperary, Cork and Tip, for all the rivalry, there's always been that edge of respect. They measure themselves against each other, they define each other. And even when one side wins, it certainly doesn't diminish the other side, the losing side. It just sets it up for next time, and that's really what this poem leaves with you. It's not just a result, but a relationship, two sides meeting, testing each other, and then doing all they can to win. And they do it again, and again, and again. Irish is Irish ella. And that's the thing of Corda. When Cork and Tipperary, Corkigugs Tipperary meet this Sunday, it might feel like just another game, another fixture, another result, but it isn't really, because nearly 300 years ago, somewhere out near Rathcormac, on an open stretch of ground with no stands or no lines, people gathered to watch the same thing unfold. A challenge issued, a contest fought, a moment where the balance shifts and a result that's remembered long after it's over. And someone watched it and decided it was worth recording, Oscuelga in Irish. Not just who won, but how it felt, the tension, the pride, the shift in belief, the respect afterwards, all of it. And when you step back from it, the structure of that game in 1741 and the structure of the game this Sunday, they aren't that different at all. The language has changed, the jerseys have changed, the field has changed, but the story hasn't. And maybe that's why this rivalry lasts, like other GAA rivalries. It's not just about Cork and Tip, Corkig agus Tipperary. It's about something deeper, something that's been carried not just through matches, but through memory, through language, in this case through a poem. And that's why when the ball is thrown in this Sunday, you're not just watching a game, you're watching something that's been played out for a very long time, something that survived colonisation, something that expresses culture, something deep within all of us who love, admire and watch the game. Accorda sin a will for this episode of Undercover Irish. I've really enjoyed taking this poem and representing it and trying to pick it apart and compare it to the modern day games that will be played out not just in terms of Corkig agus Tipperary at the weekend, but are played on fields all over Ireland and all over the world, celebrating our ancient game and our ancient custom of hurling and indeed Gaelic football. If you've enjoyed this episode of Corja, I'm going to share this particular poem, the Irish version of it and the English translation of it as well, recording and remembering that day in a field near Cormac where the first recorded meeting of a Cork and Tipperary game took place back in 1741. I'm going to share that over on my Patreon for people to view, so do go over and have a look at that particular poem. I encourage you, if you're going to the game on Sunday, safe travels. If you're watching it, enjoy every aspect of it. If you've enjoyed this particular podcast and are enjoying the podcast Undercover Irish, please do consider supporting on Patreon for the price of a cup of coffee every month. I'd be extremely appreciative, and I'm extremely appreciative to patrons who support. Gorv míle maith agam a cárja. A cárja, until the next time, Fanigi Slán, Berigi Bua, Slán go fóil ma cárja.